Hello, my name is Marque Stansberry, your host for the Keeping It Real Community Forums. Today we're going to talk about the neighborhood. Does the neighborhood condone and support criminal activity? As crime continues to spiral out of control in metropolitan Bakersfield, many residents inside and outside of these hotspots are beginning to wonder if the community itself is the blame for what's going on, from drive-by shootings to open-air drug sales, single parents with unruly, disrespectful children roaming the streets. In this segment, we will explore the transformation of many of our at-risk communities from autonomous, self-regulating communities that valued integrity, character, and family, and in education, to the contemporary situation in the urban areas where gangsters and thugs reign supreme in many of these communities. Today I am joined by our reoccurring guest, Dr. Gordon Porter. He's a counselor for the local school district, and to his right, our own Roland Banks, who's an outreach specialist and also assistant pastor. So I begin with Dr. Porter. We were just talking about community norms. Give me an idea, what community norms specifically do you think most contribute to the perception of delinquency and criminality in our community?
Usually it starts with the stereotype of the ethnic cultural group. It also starts with the neighborhood, where one lives, the economic profiles, and the lack of education. I think a combination of all of those ends up becoming a norm when you're a product of an environment that condones those norms. The difficulty is, how do you break that cycle? We talk about organization, community involvement, and I think all of those things are essential and vital. But I think the real essential aspect is the core of the family unit. And I think that's where you start.
Okay. Roland, we've been talking as well. We've been conversating about our communities and some of the norms and behaviors that are accepted and those that are done in our community. Can you tell me, what is your idea about these hot spots and ways that we can try to work with community members to higher the expectation for our kids?
I think that the people that live within these communities, they really need to be empowered. You have several bad apples, so to speak, in the communities that spoil it for the whole neighborhood. So the people within those communities that live in those communities, they really need to take ownership. They need to band together and take ownership and come up with a plan or a strategy where they can change some of the things that they see going in their communities. A lot of times we look at the economics and low income, but traditionally, even in 60s and 70s, there were low income neighborhoods during those times, but you didn't see the violence and all the other things. So I think media has something to do with that, different types of music and how African-American males are portrayed in movies and through videos and things like that. I think all of that is causing this gangster thug mentality to perpetuate itself within the community. If we, as people that are concerned and people that want to take responsibility, band together, then I really believe that we can make some differences in our neighborhood.
And yet, I often wonder, why is the thug life so appealing to our young boys in these communities that we're speaking of?
Well, it's very simple. It's marketing. I mean, first of all, the clothing. You had a clothing style that was really unacceptable in the school environment, but became very adaptable in the home environment. And if you go back to when you were raised as a kid, your parents had a say-so over what you wear. parents now condone what the children want to wear. They go out and they support them economically in buying clothes that are either sagging, oversized. And then the other factor is the marketing manufacturers got involved. And then they started to appeal to that population. Then you end up having a culture within a culture. It became fashionable for people to wear oversized clothing versus I remember getting criticized for wearing things that were too small. So it's a different kind of a mindset that perpetuates an image, a profile, and becomes part of that community.
Roland, you had mentioned socioeconomic factors, and you're right. They've been a constant in communities of color, in particular African Americans. You know, we've historically been, many of us have lived in poverty, had large communities where poverty was a constant, but yet there wasn't the type of behaviors that we are seeing today exhibited by many of our community members. You know, we've just had a string of murders in our area that have went unsolved. And I open this up to any of you who want to take this. What are the motivations for community people to, on the one hand, do the right thing and report these things, but on the other, maintain their safety? I mean, it's quite dubious, isn't it?
It is, and I think a lot of people that live in the neighborhoods and have information about what goes on as far as crime and, self-destructive behavior with people in there, they're really scared, they're fearful that if they say something to the police, cooperate with the police, or even if people think they snitched and cooperated with the police, they're going to be people that make their life very difficult. And so we have to find a way that we can support those people. They have secret witness programs and things like that where they can tell what they know and not be identified. But when it's all said and done, the people that live in the neighborhoods, they've got to take the responsibility. And you can't live your life based on fear what might happen. This younger generation is different. They don't have the respect and the pride in themselves that we had when we were growing up. I think that's part of what goes on with the families and maybe the fathers not being around. If we were poor, our clothes were always nice. They were always clean. We always had respect for adults. And these are some of the things that we don't see these days. And we want to blame it on the lack of income coming in to the homes. But it's deeper than that. And I agree with my colleague, Dr. Porter, when he says it's a breakdown in the family. And if that family is not supported, then we're going to continue to see our neighborhood spiral downward.
We talked a little bit about the urban lifestyle and how that's been romanticized and glamorized, not romanticized, but actually glamorized in the media, from the clothing to some of the lyrics of the music that we're listening to. I would really think twice about anybody who said that the music, the marketing to our kids is not having a direct impact on their behaviors.
Well, I mean, again, we go back to where we are in the culture. And children are only reacting to what has been dominant in the media that sells and market our products. You can't go to a movie theater without seeing violence. Violence transfers over into our communities. Kids imitate what they see. You're also seeing a situation where violence is profitable. How often do we stop in the middle of a TV show to see someone chasing a car for hours until ultimately we want to see them either in some dramatic fashion where I reflect back to the OJ situation where he was out on the freeway driving back to his house and people was wondering not how long it was going to take for him to get there, but what was going to happen when he got there. Because there was claims that he had a gun in the car. I find that violence is becoming an alternative for people to achieve their economic goals. And on the flip side of that, it doesn't always perpetuate for people living in low-income areas. Just recently, you had a couple who was laid off from their company. They had 5 children, 2 sets of twins. And under the pressures, the ability to provide and to maintain just to stay above the economic level of survival, a person decided that, hey, the values of earning a living was more important than having a life to live. And he ended up taking his entire family in a suicide mission that ended up resulting to the death of every member of that family over the fact that they lost their job. So the culture is not just inner city, low income, ethnically oriented,
yeah,
but
right.
it's a part of our systemic in our society.
I think it's interesting. I saw an interview one time with Ice-T, the rapper,
Right.
and he was saying that he would not let his children listen to his music. That's very interesting to me because when it's all said and done, the parents have the responsibility to monitor what their children are listening to and what their children are watching. I know I have small children and we're constantly monitoring what kind of music they're listening to, what they're watching on TV. This is prime time, and I'm appalled sometimes at the things that are on during prime time for my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old to sit and watch. So where we used to have to maybe leave home to experience some of these behavior that we try to shield our kids from, they can now sit down and watch TV and be exposed to things at a very young age. And I think that's one of the things that perpetuates this cycle.
And yet, we have began discussions about the single female-headed households. There was a couple authors running around talking about single female-headed households were the most responsible for male criminality, stating that if you eliminate the single female-headed households out of the equation for crime and incarceration, that the race between the ethnic groups would be, the differences would be eliminated. I think that's kind of far-fetched in a way that like you said at another segment, the single females are doing the best they can, many of them, but yet we know that so many don't have the skills, the resources, and the supports to do exactly what you're talking about, monitoring the TV and the media, like Dr. Porter said, looking at the type of clothes and making a determination about the appropriate clothes to wear, to the extent to where if you're in the community now and you're not sagging, you are the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, but Mark, I think when you look at what is occurring, you have a society that have a lot of issues. I mean, and to say even a single parent, male or female,
Right.
and I encounter this on a daily basis. We once had a society not too long ago where you had an individual who went to work and there was somebody that stayed home and raised the children. It's very difficult when you don't have that other person in the home, and now you have to assume two roles where you have to go out and provide a living for your family, and then you can't be in two places at the same time. So who's taking care of your children? And then the relationships that we have. There's very little time to nurture relationships. If you had a job, you come home, you pick them up from the daycare center, you got to come home, prepare meals, go over to homework. Does anybody sit down and say, how was your day? Let's have some downtime.
There seems to be no time for that.
There is no time. And it's an impossible task. And then we look at it from a reactionary point. Why is it that we have these problems with children? Are we properly nourished? Are we properly nurtured? It is a very difficult task, even though people have given valiant efforts to succeed. And occasionally you have some success stories. But the norm, it does not work. And until we take self-responsibility, understanding that when we want to have a family, we need to understand what's all involved with that. And in having children, we need to live within our means and make sure we can provide the best for our children and put our children first. And the children are a legacy of generations to come. But if we don't cultivate that from the basic fundamental of providing them the necessities, it's a lost cause.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the emphasis within our families has changed. People that has been deprived of maybe certain luxuries in life, there was a generation that went after those luxuries. And I think because they wanted to move up the corporate ladder or become successful in these areas, they left their family behind, left their children to themselves. And so now you have these children who might have all the trappings, the Wiis and the Jordans and have all of that, but yet and still that level of appreciation that it takes hard work for me to provide these things for you is lacking. And I know with my own personal life, I want my kids to be exposed to everything possible. I want them to travel nationally. I want them to travel internationally. I want them to see what the world has to offer. But yet and still, I don't want them to take for granted that that's just how it is. it's that way because mom and dad work hard and provide those things for you. So we've got to cultivate in our children a sense of appreciation and not so much a sense of, this is owed to me. This is mine and this is owed to me and you give this to me. No, you have to go out there and you have to work for what you want and you work hard for it. And in making that link between what you have and working hard for it, that level of appreciation is there. And so they don't have a consumer mentality. They don't have a you owe me mentality.
Right. With respect to community influences, we know that there are internal mechanisms of control and there are external ones, whether it be the economy, and other greater macro level influences on the community. And then there are those micro level or internal controls in the community. Which of those, the internal or the external controls, do you see most impacting what people inside of the community do?
Well, Mark, it's kind of a loaded question
I'm sorry,
and a thought, but I guess if I understand what you're saying is that there is a balance between the two, and I'll put it on a simpler nature. If I had a group of kids in a neighborhood who is looking to do something after school to keep them out of mischief, and say they want to be able to go and play basketball in the wintertime in the local gym, you need some external factors or influences to allow a facility to be made available for them to go, and then it takes resources to keep that facility open. I go back to Prop 13 that impacted a lot of those external factors because all of a sudden the libraries, the parks, the gymnasiums, all were closed due to lack of funding, and people chose, legally and ethically chose, that I rather have my property taxes on my home reduce and sacrifice monies that could be going toward community services that provide
Proposition 13.
That was Prop 13.
Right.
So externally, you have those factors, and then internally, you have the self-responsibility of knowing that today, kids have to occupy themselves with high-price items, iPods, computers.
And that's that consumerism that you were talking about.
Absolutely. And yet, you go back when I was a child growing up, we entertained ourselves by using our creativity. We play cowboys and Indians with the whole long stick and the clothespin and the rubber band. You became innovative in things, building tree houses and playing hide and go seek. You raced around the block, which kind of resorts to the physical fitness that we lack today. You just became innovative, and you did not have the economic prowess that you see taking place today. So when you talk about external and internal, I think there has to be a balance
between
but there's
the two.
too much lack of the external and not enough of the internal.
The relationship between members of the community, African Americans, Hispanic, what have you, and law enforcement and the authorities historically has been one of, it's been somewhat tumultuous. You know, there's mistrust and the relationship has not been the best for either the law enforcement and authorities or the community people. Yet, you know, many of the people in the community pay taxes. The law enforcement has a responsibility to serve and protect. But yet, as I stated earlier, many of the crimes in our communities go unsolved, and there's a level of fear and apprehension that impacts directly the quality of life in those communities. How can we come to some type of paradigm shift with regard to the relationship, the legacy, that legacy of the relationship between law enforcement, local authorities, and our community to get it to work better, to where people are not roaming the streets who have committed murders and other heinous crimes? How can we work toward to build that gap, at least from the community perspective? We don't have law enforcement here, but from a community's perspective, how can we work with our community people to have them maximize and better leverage their law enforcement resources?
There is definitely a deep-rooted, because of some of the injustices that we've suffered, people of color have suffered in the past. There is definitely some deep-rooted